Hello and welcome to this short presentation where I'm going to talk a little bit about what is a complex problem really. And in this presentation, we're going to talk about what that is. And we're going to talk very briefly about a strategy that I've developed and others have developed to talk about how to tackle it. So the starting point when thinking about complex problems is understanding that we live in a complex and uncertain world. That doesn't mean that there's no real answers to things, but what it means is some problems are not as simple as you may think. A lot of problems that are complex, complex really means multiple layers, multiple different ways of interpreting the same thing, multiple different angles of looking at it. But generally, I like to think of it this way. A complex problem is one that has multiple possible answers and you're not quite sure which particular path to tackle. When you think of the term wicked problem, which gained some popularity in the 70s and 80s, a wicked problem is a problem that has no structure to it. And by structure, we mean we don't really know what a possible solution would be, but we do see the symptoms. We might label these problems as things like crime, poverty, problems that persist over a long period of time that we just don't seem to have good answers to. And no matter what we try, it doesn't seem to improve. There's been some really big picture problems that have been tackled this way over the years. But really, a complex, uncertain world produces complex, uncertain situations. So we need a different approach for tackling that. This is the traditional way of thinking about it. I'm using this not to bash the people that have been there before, but you'll see these are the 4 steps to solving any problem. Identifying the problem or defining the problem, diagnosing the causes, diagnosing the solutions, and then choosing the solutions that you wish to implement. There's been a lot of criticisms of this. We sometimes call this the waterfall approach. This is an old way to think about it, and this comes from a book written by 2 authors, Alan Newell and Herbert Simon, around solving problems. I think it's called The Human Problem Solver. And these scholars were looking at ways to convert the problem-solving process into algorithms so they could begin to play around with things like chess-playing computers and artificial intelligence. The issue with this is that in a complex problem, which is the problem we were talking about before, a complex problem doesn't have a clear definition or a clear structure yet. So we don't know what's causing the problem, but we'll see the symptoms. Poverty and crime being the most extreme examples of that. Other examples that I might often ask, but people might often ask me about, is that they'll talk about things like, well, my staff are turning up late for work. My sales are down. So in other words, you're feeling the symptoms of that problem. You're catching the wind of it, and you know deep down that a problem has many different symptoms and it has many different ways it's manifesting itself, but you're really not sure why. And that's when this model breaks. So when you're dealing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in future presentations. Actually, the one I posted a couple of days ago talks a little bit about leading creatively through complex problems, but this one here talks a little bit about the steps that you would go through. Now, this is a really helpful way to think about going through a complex problem, defining the problem, diagnosing the causes, diagnosing the solutions, and choosing the solutions. But it's not realistic. And it's not realistic because often problems are emergent, or in other words, they just happen. You've heard that phrase, things just happen. And, often with an expletive in front. That's where this has its issues. So rather than dive headlong into the debate rather between agile methods and waterfall, I'm going to skip past this and move to the next slide. So complex problems are different than regular problems. They're different because there's no clear definition at the start, and there's multiple different ways in which people seem to think there are possible definitions and solutions. Remembering, if you've done any study in this area, that when somebody says that the problem is, they're really talking about the solution is. And there's a great paper on this called The Garbage Can Model of Decision Making by James Cohen. I can't remember the rest of the authors, but they talk about people in organizations often have hobby horses that they like. And so they'll invent problems so they can implement a solution that they would like to, and with a solution that they would like to see implemented and used. But remember this one thing from this, if you get nothing else, a complex problem is one where you're not sure what the solution is because you're not sure what the problem is, because you can't define it. You can only describe the symptoms. That might be like the example I said before, the sales are down, people are not coming into work on time. My sector, the higher education sector, I work at a university, if you can't tell by the logo on this slide. At the moment, we're going through a period of decline, and we're not seeing as many students as we would like. And as a result, some of those, we have to make some very rash decisions, but we're not really sure why people aren't coming to university anymore. But people are offering excuses. Oh, well, there's a better vocational training program in institutions now. It's too expensive. They're doing other things. They don't see the value proposition anymore. All of those definitions could essentially be correct, and they could all be right. But the bottom line is we're not absolutely sure whether they're right. We're just guessing, because there are multiple ways of interpreting possible definitions of the problem and many different possible solutions that we may want to implement and use. So what do? How do you get through this? Do you just throw your hands up and quit? A lot of people do. I wouldn't recommend that. I'd recommend you give it a shot. So the magic here is to find the core conditions that frame the problem and the solution. Or in other words, think about what is the thing that makes the problem problematic. What are the conditions that cause it to exist? And the goal here is to dig a little bit deeper and frame a potential solution that no one else has thought of. So there are a couple of hacks to this. And the first is looking for the way in which people express what the problem is. What do I mean by that? Well, what are they saying? What are they thinking and feeling? So empathy, which I'll talk about in another video, empathy plays a huge role in this, because empathy allows you to explore a problem from another person's point of view. Now, you're not wanting to get deep into their psyche and understand the motivations for why they're doing things. You're not a psychologist. You're just trying to understand the way that they frame it. So let's pick on the one sales example that we were talking about earlier. If someone comes to you and said, our sales are down because we have more competitors, that is an expression of the problem. Someone might also say, our sales are down because our customer service sucks. And when they get on the phone, like they do with certain telecommunication companies in Australia, you'll wait at least an hour. And so they'll switch to a company that offers better service. There could be a million different reasons. The first place to start is to talk to people in the problem situation, or in the situation that is currently complex and difficult to solve, and figure out what are the perspectives that are in the problem. Now, we want to go a little bit deeper than that. So this is a whistle-stop tour. I have whole courses on this. What are the underlying tension points that make it a problem? Or in other words, why is this a problem in the first place? Where is this tension or pain, you could say pain if you wanted to, coming from? Because you've got all these different points of view. Now you're comparing them. Now you're looking at them and you're saying, okay, how come all these different people have different viewpoints, and why is that important? The magic here is that it's just a little bit of mapping, if you like. And I've got a whole video on this channel about why map a problem. This is the reason why. Because you want to see the different points of view. You want to understand how the problem became problematic, because what you want to do in step 4 is frame a solution. Now, you could not frame a solution, but if you're in an organization and you wear a shirt like this, you probably are being paid quite a decent amount of money to come up with an answer. You get to that answer by understanding all of the perspectives in the situation that are the most dominant and relevant, and then you want to understand this one simple question. What are the conditions that cause this problem to exist? Once you know those conditions and you are confident of that, then you can start modeling and developing testable solutions. So again, this is very quick, very detailed information, very high level information, not detailed at all, very high level information. And we're talking about the future here of problem solving in your organization or in any organization. But running through these steps again, dig a bit deeper and try and frame a solution. Have the courage to do that, but you get to that by exploring the perspectives that make the problem relevant. There's a great book on this called Systems Thinking, Systems Practice from the 1980s if you want to spend years going back through all that stuff. But let me save you the time. Look at the different ways that the problem is being constructed by people, the way that they're thinking about it, the way they're expressing it. And a clue to that is, what are people saying that annoys them about the problem? What are the symptoms? Compare those symptoms and then go into the way in which that conflict is created, the tensions, the conflicts, the issues, the pros and the cons. And then what you'll begin to notice is that by looking at it and zooming out, you'll immediately begin to see the conditions that make the problem what it is. Or in other words, without getting into the matrix of it all, what makes the problem the problem. And once you see that, you'll be at the root level or the basement level of the perceptions, and you'll begin to understand how complex this is. And we don't want to talk about how it doesn't exist. We're not going to talk about that. I will put a video up on the cognitive side of this at some point. I did an extensive amount of research on that, but it's really scary stuff. And then you want to come up with a frame for the problem, and then you want to test different solutions to see if it changes or removes those conditions. Remembering again that the magic here is in taking the tension out of the problem by creating a new situation in which the previous problem can't exist. That may not always be possible, and you might have to live with the complexity, but that's the illusion of complexity in a nutshell, that there are conditions, initial conditions that created the problem to exist. Your job as a manager or a leader is to dissolve those tensions and to come up with a new solution that will remove the problem from being able to exist. And that's the sleight of hand that we're looking to create here. So there's a couple of examples here. Here's an example from a real world case study that we've done, which I still haven't published. So how would IT or enterprise architecture or a system create re-traumatization of an assault victim? So a couple of years ago, a colleague of mine was an enterprise architect working for a government department. And I have to anonymize all this because obvious reasons. But what he discovered was when somebody went through a case of assault, be it sexual or otherwise, they would constantly be re-traumatized by the system. So this is a well-known phenomena in social justice, in social work and places like that. What happens is if you imagine you get assaulted and you report it to the police, and then you've got to go to court, then you've got to talk to lawyers, so you're retelling your story on multiple occasions. So this re-traumatization problem is what I would call a complex issue. At the time, we know why it's happening, but we don't know how to stop it. So in other words, we could say the re-traumatization is a good frame for the problem because sexual assault and assault victims and any kind of victims in this assault bracket are having to relive this horrible experience, and they might have post-traumatic stress disorder, and they're continuing to go through this pain over and over again. Now, the net result of that is when they're re-traumatized, they leave the system and criminals get away with it. So we know what the problem is, but we don't know how to stop it, right? And that's a complex problem in a nutshell. So in this example, how do we get past it? Now, I'm not sure how that looks on your screen, but it looks kind of small on my screen. So you might want to pause this and have a look, but this is the journey anyway, briefly. This is the journey that somebody goes on when they go through a re-traumatization experience. So if we just follow one part of the story here, you'll see, hopefully you can see my arrow, you can see this unhappy victim here gets assaulted. They then go through the system. They've got to talk to police, doctors, lawyers, psychiatrists, nurses, and in Australia, Centrelink or Social Security or whoever is helping to pay for this. They might have to go to a gynecologist, a family therapist, a prosecutor, so on and so on and so on. What they found in this particular story is these victims were retelling their stories more than 65 times. And what happens is, you can see here I haven't quite edited this properly. Checkout page, I'm just using a journey map. So forget about that bit there. So we'll just we'll use the magic of real-time editing here, and we'll cross that out. They don't go to a checkout page, and they don't have any follow-up or no product satisfaction here. What happens is they leave the process and they go off the radar. So you can see here they're leaving the legal process. They're no longer a part of the whole deal, and essentially the person who has perpetrated the crime gets away with it. You may be wondering, if you've gotten this far, what happened? How did they solve the problem? Part of the way they did that was to reduce retraumatization. That's what RT stands for there, by a significant number. More people now saw the process through. How? Well, an app was invented by my colleague and my enterprise architect friend that allowed the story to be captured once. And then once the story was captured, before any meeting that would happen, is the story would be forwarded to that party through an app that the integrated service providers had to log into. So they already had to log into this app to track the case, because that's the way it was working in this particular government department. So the story would then be forwarded to these people in the form of the app, and before the meeting could take place and they could fill in any forms, they had to read the story. So the victims were not retelling the story and therefore not reliving the post-traumatic stress disorder experience, thereby at least somewhat, not completely, removing the problem from happening in their lives. Or as I've written here, this was something that removed the conditions that caused the problem to exist. And that is the challenge with complex problems. You have to get to a point where you understand, and there's a very good framework for this if you want to read it, the Carnifan framework by Dave Snowden and co. I think it's CN. I probably butchered that because I'm not Welsh, but it's you look it up anyway. CYNEFIN, and it breaks the complexity into segments, and that's very helpful for this kind of thing because it helps you to move the complexity into segments, and you can see, okay, that's this kind of problem, that kind of problem, this kind of issue, that kind of issue. Any kind of tool actually will help you. Mind mapping can help you. Concept mapping can help you. Werner Ulrich's stuff on critical systems heuristics can help you. There's a bunch of methodologies, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, practically speaking, this is the goal. You want to understand how we got here. You want to understand what's the reality that we're currently facing. And in other words, what I like to ask this question, two questions I like to ask. One is, what are the conditions that cause this problem to exist? And if we know what the problems are that cause the problem to exist, if we know what the conditions are that cause the problem to exist, if we can get to that point and say, okay, the problem exists because of these conditions. Again, we're not framing a solution at this point. We're just trying to understand, how did we get here? And you get there through talking to people and exploring the history and interviewing people very briefly and asking them these questions. And then another question you might want to ask to begin to frame a way out is, in 12 months' time, and I stole this from Dan Sullivan and other people like that, and Russell Ackoff. In 12 months' time, if we were to look back on this situation and we would feel happy and satisfied, what do you think would have had to have changed in order for us to have a big smile on our face or for things to be different? What are those conditions that are causing the problem? So you need to dissolve those conditions by asking questions like that, or the magic Harry Potter question. If you had a magic wand and could do anything, what would you do? Well, I would stop the conditions that cause the problem to exist. If my sales are down, I need to figure out why. I need to figure out what's causing that. And I need to build something on top of that that removes the problem from existing. I know it sounds a little weird, but that's what you have to do with complex problems, because there's no way really in a mess to navigate out. Because usually what it is, and I'll have another video on what a mess is, there's no way out, because you're really talking about a situation in which it is a bunch of interconnected problems that have emerged over time. And the added complexity, and you'll see this in Dave Snowden's work, is that there's a lot of perceptual elements here. There's a lot of people thinking and looking at the situation that it's not prevalent in nature. Now, nature is complex. It has biological adaptive systems and all that stuff, but when it comes to people, people can create thoughts, and their thoughts seem like they're real. And in a lot of situations, they act and then they create messes, and they become interconnected messes, if you've ever read the work of Russell Ackoff. And that'll do it for. So this was just a very short example of how complex problems work, just to give you a bit of an insight. If you like this kind of thing, subscribe or stick around or leave a comment or do whatever you need to do. There's a bunch of other videos on my channel where I've tackled this, but I've really neglected this channel, so I'm starting to post more content here because I want to get this kind of stuff out to people. The key takeaway from today, just to summarize, is always look at the conditions that cause things to exist before you start making those solutions. Don't judge. And I got a bunch of things here that I'm going to talk about over the coming weeks that I think you'll find interesting, or you won't. And but look, if you've ever had any experience with dealing with these kinds of problems, let me know how you solved it. I'll leave a comment, positive or negative, and I will read it. I'm not promising that I'll reply, because sometimes people leave really strange comments and I don't know how to reply. But other than that, look, I'm very happy to continue with you if you have some kind of situation where you've solved something like this. Like, there's other examples out there, like the police force and things, where some really interesting stuff. But I'm keen to talk to you about those stories, and perhaps leave a comment or subscribe. Anyway, have a great day or evening wherever you are, and I look forward to recording and talking to you again soon. Thank you.